Okay, here we go in part 2 of Hidden Animal Part 2, or Part B. And the purpose of this video is to show how we can use a couple of new tools, the burn tool, the dodge tool, to create highlights and shadows. Okay, so that, again, we're trying to make something feel a little bit more 3D instead of 2D. Okay, so the last part A of this Hidden Animal Part 2 was using a multiply layer, right? So I made another one for the tadpoles and the frog, other parts of the frog, and the water layer with a pattern. And before I continue, I just want to show you that we can create groups. Sometimes your layers start getting really long, so grouping your layers is really helpful sometimes. To do that, you can highlight your first layer that you want to include in the group, hold Shift, and click the bottom layer that you want to include with your group, and then it will highlight everything in between. So if you have all of those gradients and pattern masks that you created from the panels, you might want to group them so that you can kind of see what's going on in your document. And there's a couple of ways to group. You can drag these and create new group, or you can right click and group from layers, or the shortcut is Control or Command G. And you can name your groups. So this is my frog texture group. And now my layer panel is much more manageable. Okay, and you can do the same types of adjustments to the entire group now just by putting it on top of the group. All right, so let's get our drawing tablets if you have them, and if you don't, just use your mouse. It's okay. And I'm going to go back to, let's duplicate our painting layer, right? Because we were demonstrating paint bucket, brushes, and gradients on this layer. So I'm going to drag this down to the new layer panel. And I'm going to lock down my original, in case Miss Reed asked me for it. Okay. And then, so I have this one, and I'm going to rename it Burn and Dodge creates light source. So I would like you to figure out where is your lighting coming from. Okay, so let's make sure we're on the correct layer. Again, we have our template locked down. We have Hidden Animal number 1 locked down. You can even lock our frog texture down, right? Because we're done with them. That way you don't accidentally do something to those layers. It's very easy to do. Okay, so now we have our burn and dodge. Just going to leave that there. And let me get my pen tablet. And we're going to work with the burn and dodge tool. The shortcut to the burn and dodge tool is O. And looks like here. Okay, dodge is on top. Dodge lightens areas. Burn darkens areas. And the sponge tool, in case you're interested, works with saturation. And you might want to, that might work for you as well. Okay, so we'll kind of go over all of them, and you can choose what works best for you. To cycle in between these tools is a very handy shortcut is Shift. You hold Shift and then the shortcut letter, so you have to know the letter, but in this case it's O. So if I hold Shift O, I'm toggling between my sponge, dodge, burn. Okay, so that's a really fast way of changing between the two, between your tools and going back and forth. notice that the burn and dodge tool is a brush, and we control our brush sizes with the bracket keys to the right of the P. For these tools, I like to actually use a pretty large brush, and if you're using your pen tablet, I'd like you to select a soft, round, pressure, opacity. So the harder that you push, the more opaque, right, or less see-through, the stronger it's going to be. If you're using a mouse, you can just select soft, round. Okay, so we have our brush. Let's look at the other options. We have our range. The choices are shadows, midtones, and highlights. So you're going to affect the darker parts, the kind of the middle parts, or the brighter parts. And this kind of just takes some trial and error. I kind of leave it on midtones. It's kind of a general. Exposure is how strong do you want your highlights and shadows to be. So I would suggest starting off pretty low, maybe even lower than this, maybe 25, until you kind of get the hang of it. And we have, let's see, our lighter parts. So where is my light coming from? So that's the thing that you need to ask yourself. Where is my light coming from? So I'm going to decide that my light is coming like this way, right? So since I have my dodge, so what parts are going to be light? We're going to talk about this more in the bunny project, but you know, it's not only the direction it's coming from, but the strength, the intensity that it's coming from, right? How high is the light? So in highlighting, go back to my tablet here. So this part's going to be a little bit lighter, maybe not below the water. Make sure you're on your right layer, right? If they're locked, it shouldn't be a problem. Maybe over here, lighter. And this is just really kind of a subtle, really subtle thing. Maybe make my water a little bit lighter, perhaps. And again, the harder you press, the more intense. And you can just keep going over and over. Again, so until you like really know, kind of start figuring it out, right, where your light is. Maybe, you know, this is destructive, by the way, right? I'm actually dodging the colors on that layer. So this is where having a duplicate is really important, right? Remember, you can only have so much in your history. You can only go back so far. So right now you have a lot of choices, but you know, if you were on the wrong layer and went too far and wanted to change it, then you know that would be much more difficult. Okay, so back to here. So I'm gonna light. All right, so it's easy to kind of like, oh, I'm lightening this lily pad, and I'm not sure if I want to do that. Right, so I'm gonna go back a couple steps. You can still select. Right, so going back and forth between your tools, W, right, let's just select the areas that I want to affect, right, this is kind of underneath, so I might want some shadow on that part, right, and then while selected, it's just like painting. You have then I can get the tips, right, of this without lighten them up without affecting the lily pad below. Okay, and just kind of create some light. So selecting is just a really good way of, and gradients, they don't work so good. Right, so let's look at the, I'm going to switch tools. I'm going to go back in time here. And Shift O to bring me to that sponge tool, and I want to show you what the sponge tool does. The sponge tool up at top, it's still a brush, and its mode is saturation, so how much color, how much intensity, right? How much saturation is going to be there, or desaturation to take color away. So let's see what let's experiment with the sponge tool. I don't really use it very often. So see how this is getting more intense? I don't know if you can really see that in the video or not. So that's another way to kind of just change your colors a little bit, right? And it also kind of lightens it up. Another way to kind of get a little bit of a light source in there. Right now, for making shadows, I should probably do a little bit more here. Turn on the right tool. All right, so we got some light going over here. I'm gonna brighten that up. Even my tadpoles, right, a little bit brighter. And you can always dodge it, so you can always make things kind of make things darker too. All right, so my light is all directed up here. I'm going to select these areas, right, and go back to O and maybe make those a little bit brighter too. And again, if you have like a really big soft brush, you can make some nice subtle changes. So burning, excuse me, Shift O. Looks like this little hand over here. And I want to make some areas darker, right? If the light is coming up here, this area is going to be a little darker. So go back to my tablet here. And I have a pretty big brush. This is where, like, to get like one thing on top of another to like kind of look like one thing's on top of the other, this is a really good tool for that. So some of our tadpoles are going to be a little bit darker here. And again, if you use a nice soft brush and low exposure, you can make those nice subtle changes. And stop at some point, right? When you feel like you have enough shadow. Maybe part of this guy's going to be a little. And this is a good way to show that that something's underwater or a little bit deeper in the water, perhaps. So, and frog's underwater. So I want the undersides of the leaves to be really nice and dark, right? And maybe the top's not as dark, right? And that gives it a little bit of form, a little bit of 3D. On my frog, a little darker. I might have to go on the texture layer for that. Let's see. He's locked. This is on. I think it doesn't matter. I'll darken up my frog a little bit. Okay. For the sake of expedience, I'm going to kind of move on guy, a little shaded. All right, probably a little bit too much there. That guy, that's okay. And this is where selection again comes into good place. So I have a lot of highlight here, and I want to maybe increase the shadow underneath here because these, to make it look like these flowers are three-dimensional, more three-dimensional. Okay, same thing probably maybe down here. So I'm going to go ahead and select those areas. So W to select. Maybe even over here, so that I can go really close to the edge of the flower and it won't dodge it. So I'm just able to like make a really dark, I can start on top of the flower actually, but I just want to get that line really close to where the flower's edge, and maybe I want to make my brush a little bit smaller here. Right, because this would be darkest, the shadow would be darkest close to the flower, right? And then go out from there. Again, probably overdoing it a little bit, but just want to kind of demonstrate. Control D so that you can maybe not see. And then, you know, take a look. What do you want to highlight? What do you want to create more shadows? But, you know, already a little bit more 3D. I'm going to go back in time and clean this up a little bit. But that's kind of burn and dodging. So you're going to use those tools to kind of create that light source. The final thing that I'm going to show you is how to change the color of something, right? Or yeah, and you might not like the look of these techniques on your art. You might say, I don't want that, right? You can just turn it in this way, but I want to see that you've attempted to start practicing with these tools, okay? Same thing with this adjustment that I'm going to have you make, and that's a hue and saturation adjustment, right? So if I want to change the color of something, I can make an adjustment on it. So say I want to change the color of my lily pads. I'll turn this back on. And I want to select all of these maybe darker green colors. Something like that. And make them a different color. I can then go to my adjustment panel. And there are lots of different adjustments, and go ahead and play with these. I'm going to show you one, but you can change the brightness of something. These are all different adjustments. The vibrance, the exposure, hue and saturation, the color balance. You can turn something black and white there. So go ahead and play with a couple, because when you add an adjustment from the adjustment panel, right, it creates a new layer. So again, you can play with an adjustment. If you don't like it, turn it off, right? But on this one, we have hue and saturation, and notice it's a mask. So where the white part is the only part that is going to be affected by this this layer. Okay, and then you can change the color to whatever you'd like by changing the hue. I'm going to make it this one a little bit more yellow than green. You could change the saturation, right? How much of that you want in there. And again, and even the lightness, right? How light or dark it is. So having and using the adjustments, right, from the adjustment panel, again, gives you another layer that you can name and change your mind about later, right? So again, layers are your friends. You're going to hear me say this a lot, and use them, name them, etc. Again, I'd like you to try an adjustment layer. If you don't like it, turn it off when you turn in your work. Okay. Like, I need to redo that burning and dodging because I didn't do a very good job. But I can keep this hue saturation. See, my adjustment is still there. Maybe I'll play around with that a little bit more. So if you wanted to change a color of your flower or any part of your image, it's really easy to do. And remember, you can select all of one color by unchecking contiguous. Please, in the beginning, as you're learning Photoshop, use the adjustment panel to make your adjustments. I'm going to point this out to you because you might just discover it on your own, that you also can create an adjustment from up on the Photoshop menu, right? I think because my visibility isn't on here. All of those same, I think all of these are also on your adjustment panel. Actually, most of them, most if not all of them, but most of these are also over here. Okay, but when you make an adjustment from the File menu, the Photoshop menu, it's permanent. It doesn't create a new layer, so you can't really change your mind about it afterward. Right? If I were to make this black and white, it changed my layer. And once I say OK and save my image, I can't go back in time and get rid of it. It's permanent. Okay, so be very careful using adjustments from the image tab on the Photoshop menu. And I think that's it.